Give me 10 seconds when you're ready, and then I can let him know.
And give us a 10-second countdown, Deshaun.
And in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to another edition of NY. I'm your host, Tait, and our guest for this edition of Media Watch is Michelle Materre. And Michelle, you're opening for yourself. Tell us.
Yes, I am. I'm opening for Creatively Speaking on the Air. We're trying something different tonight, doing a combined Media Watch and Creatively Speaking program. Let's see how this goes.
Another first.
Another first.
We're always doing these things, aren't we?
Another, yes, somehow or another.
Well, folks, this is an unusual experiment, but we think we can make it work. Michelle and I are going to do a look back at some of the significant events and media issues of 2013, and a quick look ahead on what we might want to happen, and what we hope should happen, and just guess at what might. So, Michelle, run with it.
Well, one of the things I was going to talk about was that there's been a phenomenon last year, and it seems to be continuing this year at Sundance, that we've had a plethora of African American, African diaspora films that started off at Sundance, did very well there, and then have been released into theaters and done well there as well. And it looks like that trend is continuing into 2014.
So that's as good a topic as any to start on. Let's start with film and maybe segue to television.
Okay.
So you talked with Sundance kicking off this plethora, to use your term. Every 10, 15 years there's this, quote, renaissance of, quote, black movies or black-oriented films. Let's talk about that supposed renaissance, and what your take is, and then we'll compare notes.
Well, I think probably topping the list is a film that we spent a lot of time talking about on Creatively Speaking this past year, and that was 12 Years a Slave. The film has done extremely well. It started off at Sundance, and it has done extremely well in the box office. It's still in the box office after, I think it's about up to 20 weeks now, which has, definitely sort of defied the usual rigor that, black films don't last long. Independent films don't last long at the box office. So here we're showing that there's a crossover audience amongst, all types of people going to see this film, which is quite outstanding film, as we know.
We, of course, did talk about 12 Years a Slave a few times on Media Watch, and I believe our last episode that I did with Miles McAfee, Film and Culture Series.
Oh, Miles, sure.
Yes, I know you know Miles. We actually got into some of it. So tell me your take on the initial reaction to the subject matter, how most of the critics initially reacted to 12 Years a Slave. For what I was getting initially was, oh, this is a hard slog and it's a horror movie, etc., etc. And of course, you know where I come from Then I'll Be Free to Travel Home. I understand that period quite well, so
exactly.
I could not understand where they were coming from initially. So you've read a number of the critiques, and you've seen a lot of the reaction on social media and in the regular press. What was your, give the audience a little bit about what that first pass was on 12 Years a Slave.
Well, I think there were almost two distinct reactions to it. One was an audience reaction, which overwhelmingly was positive, and then there was the critics' reaction, which was not necessarily always that. But I do think, for me, a film that creates dialogue, that causes people to think and to continue to talk about, is a film that has done its job. And when I went to see the film opening weekend, I was in a mixed audience. It was about half black, half white. And people on both sides of the table were coming out of that film very emotionally affected. And I think it has continued to do that. And I think it has continued to spur some dialogue that we've needed to have in this country for a long time around slavery, because that topic is something that, as we know, people don't ever want to really talk about in depth.
Yeah.
And so here is a piece of media doing the job that I know I got into this business to do, and that is to use it to talk about difficult subjects and as a tool to affect positive change.
The interesting thing for me was all these critics, predominantly white, I might as well be blunt about it, who were really upset at the relatively honest portrayal of what the institution of slavery was all about.
Mm-hmm.
And so they began to focus their critique and their criticism on why was he so physically, quote, not abusive, but why did he depict the physicality of the cruelty and the torture in such a vivid and in-your-face way? And as I was trying to explain to Miles and Bob Anthony when we were talking about 12 Years a Slave, if you'd ever studied that period, and if you'd done anything, whether it's primary research, tertiary research, or your own work on that period, you understood that what he had done was basically, quote, whitewashed the physical torture that those enslaved people were faced with day in and day out. And I'm sure he did that because he understood, had he really told that story in its absolute physical brutality, the obscenity of it would have been so harrowing and so depressing, no one would have gone to see that movie.
Absolutely, and yet it still has had an amazing impact on folks. So
and they're still talking about how physically brutal it was, and how who was it? Was it Armand White who called it?
Oh, please!
What he had the nerve to call it?
Let's not go. He just made a real fool of himself the other day. So
let's tell the folks about it. If we're going to talk about this film, Armand White is a self-styled media cultural critic. I call him self-styled because basically my take. Sometimes he actually hits the nail on the head. Sometimes
Rarely.
He's so. Thank you very much.
Rarely.
I was trying to be charitable.
Rarely.
I'm usually the one who's not charitable.
Sorry.
But that's okay. We're here about calling it like it is. Usually, as you say, he misses by a mark. And basically, he just seems to want to be contrarian in order to raise his own flag and get his own publicity. And that's basically the way I look at most of his stuff. So for him, tell the folk what happened at the
New York Critics Award.
Critics Award.
Well, from what I understand, I mean, it's all second, third hand, but from what I understand, he actually heckled Steve McQueen as Harry Belafonte is handing him the award. Now, that is disrespectful right there to me. I'm sorry. Yeah. Mr. Belafonte can do no wrong in most people's books. And so for him to heckle
disrespecting Steve McQueen
as well as
disrespecting Harry Belafonte.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what he said from the audience was rude. And it's it doesn't really, it's not what we as a people need to be promoting. We as a people need to be coming together rather than pulling each other down and pulling each other apart.
For you folks who may not know, I'm sure some of you may not, Armand White, with the last name of White, happens to be not white.
Not at all.
I don't want to call him black because, as far as I'm concerned, he has excised himself out of our race.
Well,
however, he's not white.
No, he's not.
So that is the kind of reaction that 12 Years a Slave has been getting.
Yeah.
Positive and negative. I will tell you when I saw it at Lincoln Square, and it was within the first week of the release. I was trying to get to the previews, really, because I wanted to do something on it for Media Watch to lead up to it, but I didn't quite get on the preview list. Not to worry, I'll work on that.
There you go.
I went to the first week screening, and Lincoln Square, where it had a very lengthy run, was predominantly more white than people of color, but it was a mixed audience, just like yours. And when I can tell you that was the first movie I had been to that from the opening credits to the end credits, there was not an extraneous sound in the theater.
Same.
Now that tells you how powerful and gripping that film really is, because I don't care what movie you go to see in what theater,
There's usual
especially in
talking.
New York, there's usually
Especially in
popcorn
New York.
rattling, there's talking.
Especially with black audiences, too.
Well, this was a predominantly white audience, and I have no problem with talking back to the screen. If a film really affects you and you want to make your editorial
Exactly.
comment, you have to be very careful of the audience surrounding you so you don't be disrupting their enjoyment of the movie. But there was not a sound in that theater, and that speaks to how well Steve McQueen, the director, and his very outstanding cast carried out that mission. It's a fabulous film. It's still in the theaters. You need to go see it. So we spent a lot of time on 12 Years a Slave,
Yes,
but it deserves that.
it does.
So there were a number of other films that came out. There was one that I'd like to talk to, not near but far, because we can segue to some of the political topics, which is
absolutely.
Fruitvale Station.
Yes.
Because that ties into
a lot of
political
yes.
stories, right? But The Butler, or as was necessary by the contractual agreement because of a previous film, Lee Daniels is
The Butler, right.
which is another joke, but we won't get into that.
Caused a lot of attention, too.
Right. So give me your take on The Butler from a film curator's perspective as opposed to just an audience viewing.
Well, I think The Butler was an example of, it actually sort of kicked off the year, which was good, because I think it sort of prepared people for what was to come. So it's kind of, a milquetoast type topic. But at the same time, it did express a topic that has happened in our history that people don't know a lot about.
Yeah, I call that a kind of subversive milquetoast.
Yes,
there's an underlying
yes.
message under there that's really, really tricky.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
And I thought that the performances were quite well done. I was very pleasantly surprised by Oprah's performance, and I think she and Forrest Whitaker had really excellent chemistry, on-screen chemistry, which again was a surprise. But I think in general, it's a kind of film. I remember asking, we reviewed it on Creatively Speaking as well, and we had sort of a intergenerational panel. And I remember having Empress, one of our curatorial assistants, interns, ask her about what she felt about the film and how much she felt that did it do its job in terms of giving a historical perspective. Now, she didn't know a lot about that part of our history. So for her, it opened her eyes, as a millennial generation, opened her eyes and made her want to go back and research more. And again, for me, that film has done, in that regard, it's done its job.
You've done a job. Yeah, I love the way it traversed that whole civil rights arc using one family.
Right.
That was very, very interesting. That was an interesting device. And of course, once you understood that it was a device, then you gave that old willing suspension of disbelief that you used to do in literature.
Yes.
You have to come to some movies with a willing suspension
That's
of
very
disbelief.
true. Very true.
And so once I realized that was the device that the director and the screenwriter was using, then I gave myself over to just watching it as a way of recording history through the eyes of one family. Because there was no way in the world in real life one family was going to be a president at every one of those major civil rights events.
Yeah.
But using that device, I think they were able to do a very excellent job of showing the dichotomy in the generations during the civil rights struggle.
Absolutely.
And that was the key to that movie for me, because that was not an in-your-face Black Power movie. That was a in-your-face Black Power movie, second generation. But guess before you got to that, you had this, where you had to fight your battles in a very almost subservient way. And I say almost because even when you're doing one of those jobs of service and servitude, there's a way to maintain your human dignity and your sense of self.
Absolutely.
And for me, they captured that extremely well in The Butler.
I thought so as well.
And that, for me, those two films as disparate as they were, The Butler and 12 Years a Slave gave you that same message of how black people, in the kinds of travails and turmoil that they face in this society, have always managed to maintain their sense of self, their sense of self-pride and human dignity, no matter what's thrown at them. And people need to understand that.
Yes.
And people need to understand that message when it's coming at them, especially young people, because they really don't, as you said, Empress just didn't understand what preceded all this stand-up-in-your-face, fist-pumping movements.
Right.
And so it's, as somebody who's much older, I can tell her, yeah, we had to walk before we could run. And we had to do a lot of building before we could stand on solid footing in order to pump those fists.
Exactly.
So what's your next film?
Well, do you want to go into Fruitvale since we were talking about
Okay, or we could do the one that came out at the back end of the year about Long Walk to Freedom.
Oh, certainly. I love that film.
All right, folks, this is Media Watch. There is a logo up there that tells you, but for the audience that's an audio audience, it's Media Watch in conjunction with
Creatively Speaking on the Air on the Black Hole Radio Network.
And we're talking films and basically entertainment culture 2013 before we move on to others.
So at the end of the year, we had the Nelson Mandela film with Idris Elba and Naomi Harris, both of whom I thought did stand-up jobs in those roles. I can't compare it to the previous film because I didn't see
the previous one either.
I did not.
so folks, as we are supposed to be media folk, we confess that was one we missed.
Yes, we did miss that one. But I think that, and it was also, call it kismet, but the timing of the release, much like the timing of Fruitvale Station, which we'll talk about later, just so happened to coincide with President Mandela's passing, which, of course, everyone was sort of taken aback by, but at the same time, it really was a fortuitous moment to get people to want to know more about South Africa and more about the anti-apartheid struggle.
Yeah.
And so the fact that the film was in the theaters then sort of helped that to be promoted along.
I'm going to come at it from a Media Watch perspective, not just on the film. The film I thought was excellently done. And Idris Elba is a phenomenal actor, as we know. Just about anything I've seen him in, he manages to own. And so we do have a number of actors like that. Denzel will own his roles. Idris Elba will own his roles. Samuel L. Jackson will own his roles. So, I mean, these are first-rate actors. I'm not saying first-rate black actors. These are first-rate actors. They just take their roles and they own them. So when I saw he was the lead, I said, oh, yeah, I got to see this. So I made sure I went to see it. And as you said, the film came out right at the passing of Nelson Mandela. Now, it was actually expected because he'd been ill, he'd been in the hospital, he'd been rushed in, he'd rushed back. When they took him home, I knew they were taking him home to actually expire at home. That's right. So it was a shock, but it wasn't a surprise. So the timing of the movie was fortuitous, I say, because it then gave you a perfect, open-ended book to take a look at the man's life and the total struggle that he had, in basic terms, become the significant figure of, even when he was in prison. And then when he got out, there he was. So what I want your take on, though, is, except for a couple, the far-right blogs stayed true to form. I mean, they just got vitriolic about all the great praise for Nelson Mandela. But what caught me was the rest of the mainstream media, who way back when did not, one, want to know who Nelson Mandela, two, were actually equating him with a insurgent communist revolutionary, whatever, whomever. I mean, this was not the far right. This was the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan himself, was a total, yes, we must support that apartheid regime in South Africa and make sure that terrorist does not get out of jail, whatever. That was the actual status quo position, Nelson Mandela, back in the day. Until, with all the protests in this country and elsewhere, the man managed to gain his freedom, and then basically through whatever magic the ancestors, whoever worked in his heart, truly was able to forgive those people for what they had done to him and his people all those years, actually was exalted to practical sainthood. So for me, I was a little appalled and aghast at how they all forgot what their original positions was on this man.
Conveniently.
Conveniently. But hey, it's good to know that at least the far right understood that they weren't about to change their position. They put the communist whatever out there. Hell, trust me, Nelson Mandela actually ran with the communists in his day. He actually ran with a whole bunch of folk. You know why? They were going to help him get his country free. And in the old days, we had blacks who fought with the British. You know why? Because the colonists wanted to keep the blacks enslaved, and the British promised them freedom. Who do you think you'd be fighting for if you were back there? We will talk some more about that.
And that's another topic for another day, right?
As we do some of this stuff, we might get to it.
Might get back to it. Right.
So the other film, that Long Walk to Freedom, in its own way of imprisonment and martyrdom, etc., that you wanted to talk to. And I can't speak to the film itself because that's one of the ones that I wanted to catch that I didn't catch, and that's Fruitvale Station. Now, I know the story because I followed it well. When Oscar Grant got killed in Oakland, we were following the media coverage, we were following the police reaction to it on Media Watch as it happened, as it unfolded. And so when Fruitvale Station came out, I definitely wanted to make sure I saw how they treated that incident. But as you said in the previous film, the timing of Fruitvale Station was right around the trial of George Zimmerman for the killing of Trayvon Martin. And there's what you call what? Not coincidence, but Kismet coming together, right?
Kismet again.
So tell us a little about Fruitvale.
I thought this was an amazing first feature film.
So it's a first-time director.
First-time
name?
feature director, Ryan Coogler.
Okay.
Young African-American guy, I think he was 25, 26,
That's
very young.
That's young.
And I thought what made this film so unique and also so effective in terms of how it handled this material was that it took a narrative, a fictionalized story, but about a real event that happened. And he did extensive research. One of his producers I've met, Ephraim Walker, he was explaining how they came up with the story and worked with the family very closely.
So even though it's, quote, fictional, it's actually based on real life events.
It's based on interviews with his family, interviews with his friends. And so I think what attracts people to stories like that is that it's still a movie. It's what makes it a movie. And it's not a documentary. You connect with the characters. I thought, oh gosh, I can't remember the actor's name. Michael, I can't think of his name now. That's terrible. The lead, both the lead, the female and male lead were excellent. Again, great chemistry. And the mother was played by, oh gosh, I'm getting bad with the names.
Take your time, it'll come back to you.
It'll come to me. But all of the roles were excellent, were really well executed, and as a result, you're gripped again by the story. And when you find out, for those who didn't know, that this was a real actual event that happened in San Francisco, in Oakland, and the fact that as a result of this film being released, the BART, the head of BART, was resigned or was asked to resign, and that a new head of BART, that's the rapid rail system in Oakland.
That's their rapid transit system in Oakland, California, folks.
he started utilizing this film as a training tool for their next generation of officers. So again, but I guess we should backtrack a little bit about that.
Well, the interesting thing is, for those of you, when we covered the story back then, this young man was on a station trying to get home, I believe, just a public transit station, and for some reason, this police officer just thought that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, even though he was catching public transportation to go home, and he ended up shooting this young man for no real reason. And I believe, if memory serves me correctly, because I didn't see the film, but I remember watching the story coverage, he was shot in the back.
Yes, he was shot in the back.
In the back, folks.
Laying down with his hands
and
handcuffs.
He had no weapon on him. And that's what made it such an egregious killing. So I don't know what kind of indictments came down, because I do believe there was a grand jury investigation on that. I wonder if the film went into that part of it.
No, it did not.
Okay.
It was really only about Oscar,
But
which
just
was
the family, the personal side. But I can understand why they would use that as a training film to teach those people this is how not to act.
Well, the officer that shot him was actually a BART officer, I thought.
Yeah, but he's a security man with a weapon.
With a weapon.
That's
with
it.
a weapon.
So
the story.
that'd be like a transit cop.
Yes, exactly.
So
and the story has it that he thought he was a rookie, and he thought he was pulling out his taser. So he thought.
Yeah, right. That's an interesting story. Okay, and you know me as a longtime journalist with skepticism up to here. When I hear I went for my taser, but I came out with my gun, and when I fired, I killed somebody. Okay, that's a different story.
I know.
Look, we've got about maybe a minute on my maybe 2 minutes on my first Media Watch show. I need to remind our guests that it's our viewers that it's Michelle Materre, professor at New School. Head of Creatively Speaking, founder and director, and in addition, curator of films, runs the program at MIST and other locations, and was very instrumental in making sure that one of my basic early films, Then I'll Be Free to Travel Home, had a very excellent debut at the IFC back in 2000, I believe it was, somewhere there. And so we go back a long ways, even before that.
Yes.
So we're going to basically transition and wrap up the first segment of Media Watch. Anything you want to tag on to that before I sign off and we continue part 2 and keep going with
Well, we're looking forward
Creatively
to
Speaking on Year?
We're looking forward to this further conversation. I think we're going to start tying together some of the social issues that revolve around these films and around the television that we were going to segue to.
Well, you know, the reason why Fruitvale Station resonates with us is because stop and frisk has been, of course, the sore point of the New York City community if you're black and you're brown. And for my money, Oscar Grant was black, brown, and a ripe target for whatever law enforcement individual felt threatened because of black-brown skin. Trayvon Martin, black, brown, whatever vigilante, whatever his makeup, felt threatened by black, brown skin, basically was telling Trayvon Martin, you have no right to exist. And so we just got a newly elected mayor in the city of New York, Bill de Blasio, who I think got the bulk of his black and brown vote because he said, we're going to get rid of stop and frisk.
Yes, he did.
But we have to explore, and we'll discuss this in the upcoming show, on how are you going to get rid of stop and frisk when the incoming police chief that you just, commissioner, is a fellow by the name of William Bratton, who was not much better, if not worse, than Ray Kelly when he was the commissioner of New York before he went to L.A.
Yes, we have to see
my
about this.
My memory says that this guy was not good for people of color when he was here the first time. Is my memory
Your memory's pretty correct.
My memory is correct. Okay, folk, I know I'm getting up there, but I'm not senile. So we're going to be talking some more about this. So I would say, even though we might be signing off a little early, this has been the current edition of NYBJ Media Watch. And guess what? We may not be doing this in association with NYBJ for the near future, but we'll still be doing it. It's a production of EVT Educational Productions. And we will continue. And so we will catch you the next time.
And
Until then, we'll just temporarily sign off and start again.
for Creatively Speaking on the Air, we'll be right back.
Ahoy there! Ahoy!
They
We're
should- we
looking
can
for
swap
the
DVDs.
pirate known as
Let
Black
me know when you're
Sailor.
ready, and we can
Pirate.
come back.